think it's probably useful to start with a little background about yourself. What are you doing? Who do you work with? And how did you get into the ethics bowl?
I work with Basis Flagstaff. That's the school I coach at, and I've been teaching for a long time. It used to be speech and debate, and then I made the transition to Ethics Bowl 4 years ago. I love talking philosophy. Actually, I got a graduate degree in world religions and philosophy, that lay dormant in me. I teach English, so occasionally it would pop up, but I wouldn't get to nerd out as much as I wanted to on a regular basis. And so Julie Peering from NAU reached out and asked if we could create an ethics bowl team. I already had a philosophy capstone. And so I roped some kids into doing it, and we were lucky enough to get an invite to nationals that year. And then we got an invite to nationals the next year. The first year we won half our games at national. The next year we placed fourth. And then the year after that, we finally won nationals. This year we won the state championship, but we didn't get the invite. We lost 2-1 narrowly. But that's four region championships, so I'm still proud of them, and they've been doing great. So yeah.
That's unreal. That's so cool. So wait, I want to ask about your master. Was it a master's, your graduate degree?
Yeah, I got a master's. Yeah.
Where did you do that, and what was it focused on? I also have a master's of theological studies. So
Oh, cool. Yes.
yeah.
So I got my undergraduate was at Macalester College in English
Mhm.
literature, and I minored in religious studies. And then I decided that the master's programs for English were a lot about like the philosophy of reading instead of the actual stories. So I just decided to go just into world religions specifically. So I went to Harvard University and just got my master's there, and I had no practical reason for it. People would be like, "What do you want
Uh-huh.
to do with your life?" I'm like, "I'm just really interested in people, and I'm interested in what people think about the world." And so this is just one avenue for me to explore that, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do later. And it ended up being my English degree I relied on when I got my job teaching, because of course, teaching world religions is not in hot demand in high school.
Mhm.
Um, and then eventually, after I had become a little more like known in my school system, they began to let me teach world religion classes and capstones and integrate some of the philosophy components as well. So that was a natural lead into ethics and
Mm.
speech debate and all that jazz. Yeah.
That's so cool. And then the last question about that, you were in the FAS, right? Faculty of Arts and Science at Harvard, or
No, I was at Harvard Divinity School. The
same?
Really?
Yeah, I did an MTS at HDS in
Oh my
2022
gosh. When did you
to 4.
graduate?
Like 2023.
Okay, 2000. This is going to age me. 2008.
Okay. I bet there are definitely some of the same people there. Charles Hallisey was my advisor. Does that name ring a bell?
No, it doesn't. But he might have
No.
been on the staff. I didn't meet all the professors there for sure. There
Yeah.
was more than I could
Yeah. What a
classes.
coincidence. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Well, I want to talk now maybe a little bit about the debate transition. So you were in competitive debate. Does that mean you did competitive debate, and what style was it? And then how did you decide to transition to ethics bowl?
Yeah, so I coached debate for a long time. That was like my first, and as soon as Basis Flagstaff opened in 2011, I was
Mhm.
coaching debate. And I learned a
Mhm.
lot and my forte was probably for the thing I coached best was probably Lincoln Douglas debate, which is a
Mhm.
debate that centers around an ethical question. And we have our school is so small that it was hard to win team awards because what they do is they aggregate your points. So the
Mhm.
more entries, the better. And we have 120 kids in our high school. And some of these schools have 2,000 kids in their high school. So if you're aggregating, it's very, very hard. We still like we won a tournament or two, but mainly we had like individual high achievers. So we had one student who placed sixth in the nation in Lincoln Douglas debate, and we had a few standouts in the state as well. And I loved coaching debate.
Mhm.
It was more like my chess brain though than it was necessarily I mean, there was some philosophy background there. And it really helps you train to be quick on your feet. But the way debate works is you can argue either side and you don't know which one you're going to argue. And it rewards cleverness, but not necessarily truth claims, which It's important to think on your feet, but there's something that feels a little off about it. Like for example, if I'm making an argument and my debate opponent doesn't actually catch it in time, then they have to accept the argument for the rest of the round. So I could just say like the sky is green. And if they don't say the sky isn't green, then suddenly the sky is green for the rest of the round, and we both have to like live with that assumption. And so it rewards like weird arguments that will catch your opponent off guard, and they won't know the refutation to off the top of their head, because even if it is a fallacious argument, it will still carry through. Now that said, like with my coaching, I tried to like put some integrity with that. I was like, I want you to make arguments that are sound, that
Mhm.
you can that hold up,
Mhm.
and you're gonna have to think on your feet about these really, really weird arguments. And sometimes you're gonna lose to these really, really weird arguments, even though it might seem unfair. That's just how it is. So I thought that it did a great job of teaching people to see both sides of an argument. I thought it did a great job of making people think on their feet and realizing like if they say one sentence, how important that one sentence might be.
Mhm.
Like to understand the gravity of a claim and how strictly it needs to be defended and the dangers of absolutes and like how that leaves yourself open. Um, but on the other hand, I thought it also might lend itself a little to kind of sophistry, the idea that any argument is correct as long as you can argue it, the idea of adversarial arguments, hiding things that are not very good for your position, more persuasive than argumentative, um, and a lot of like, there's no like, you can be kind of rude in it. And if your coach tells you not to be, then that's great. But there's a lot of onus on the coaches, not in the framework itself,
Mhm.
to keep kids honest and kind and respectful to each other. So yeah, that's the debate history. Long answer, sorry.
No, all rings true. I also coach public forum. We have sort of an academy based in China. Um,
Oh,
and I was a competitive debater all through high school as well, and then university, mostly Australs and British parliamentary style. So not so much the really high intensity and the arms race associated with policy, PF, and LD, I think as well, right? People are spreading in LD. Is that true? Where they speak like
yeah,
500
I mean,
words a minute,
I
or
believe they're now spreading in public forum. They like every time they like try to get, so they invent LD to try to get away from the intensity of policy. And what I like about LD is at least there's rules. There's like a criterion and a value, so it's not as subjective, but at
yeah.
the same time, a lot of them are spreading. And
Mhm.
um and honestly, none of our debaters spread. Not even the person who went to nationals was a spreader. But they had to deal with spreading all the time because some judges were very favorable to it. And then public forum came out and they're like, this is new. We're going to make it more real world. And then it suddenly devolved back into spreading. So we had that. Public forum was a little harder for us because you needed two people to do it. And
Mhm.
when you're a small school and they're aggregating for points, that means that your team is now only one team instead of
Mhm.
two for the aggregate points. So the whole setup was kind
Mhm.
of anti-public forum, but we still competed in it. And I watched it slowly kind of, I don't want to say erode, but move towards a more LD format. So the debates were very blended and very similar. The
Yeah.
more time went by, it seemed.
Absolutely. And I'm watching the transition happen in China right now. So, like, it's pretty new in China and it's gaining popularity now. But the further we get into it, the faster the speeches are getting and the more kind of weird arguments. Still, there hasn't been a single critique in any of the national China debates that I've ever seen. So, we haven't quite gotten to that really abstract level of debate yet, but I'm sure we're getting there. When it comes to the ethics bowl, then, this is a point that, do you know Matt Deaton? Are you aware of
I,
him at all?
I don't off the top of my head,
He's
but I am bad with names, so I might have
No,
seen
no,
him.
that's fine. Is one of the basically founders, I guess, or in 2010 he was part of the ethics bowl, the National High School Ethics Bowl, the outreach director, and did a lot to help grow it. And he's just written this book. I just interviewed him yesterday and finished his book. Oh, my background, Ethics Bowl to the Rescue, right?
Oh
And
my God.
it's really, really good. Oh, you should definitely get an online copy and have a read. You certainly be interested in it. But one of the arguments he makes is that debate, he's a bit more critical of debate than you are. He thinks that debate drives people to really just like a negative way of approaching people and argumentation in the real world. I
Mm.
sort of align with this. I feel like I had to unlearn a lot of my debate skills over my life in order to just engage with people more productively. And I think his claim, and I would probably agree, the Ethics Bowl really does prioritize a discourse that's much more relevant to boardrooms and to university seminars and to real world productive discourse, and
Mhm.
probably leans in the right direction in terms of like protecting democratic ideals. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so I am obviously a fan of ethics bowl over debate. That said, I think debate is I've seen both effects. I've seen it create a adversarial relationship between people. But I've also seen people who are timid and afraid to speak find their voice. So I don't want to broad brush it. I would say like it's a different experience for everyone. And what I will say about debate is that the coach plays a very large role, that the rules will not necessarily enforce everything that goes into learning. And so there's more of a burden on the coach to emphasize that. While the very structure of Ethics Bowl is supportive towards some of that mission just ahead of time. And so I do think it leads to a more collaborative, more friendly feel. And you don't feel like you're adding on to something. You feel like you're working with the system instead of augmenting it
Mm.
as a coach. And it's much more like real world. Like if I have an argument with a friend, I don't like just set out contentions and like barrage them with ideas. Like I make arguments. I'm open to the flaws and I'm willing to change my mind if and
Mhm.
I really do care about the truth claims of things because even if there's not a judge to challenge me, I like how like it really makes you think about like, okay, humility is important and carefulness is important and be consistent and so on. So also
Absolutely.
team building is great too. I think that dynamic is one of the hardest things about ethics poll, and it's not in LD. It's a little in PF, but when you get to choose one partner, it's minimized. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you get into a not a rut, but a structure with that partner, and you're doing separate tasks and stuff. Whereas in Ethics Bowl, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, the presentation is with five students, and anyone can and normally do speak. Is this how you guide your teams? Like normally, all five speakers say something in any presentation, or
Yeah, so I would say like yeah, I should say if people are not familiar with ethics poll and doing this, one big difference is in ethics poll and like debate, you choose the position you think is most right instead of being assigned a position. And credit is given to seeing the opposing viewpoint and audibly stating what it is and challenge and showing the limitations of your own position rather than kind of over presenting confidently and hoping the other team figures it out. When you're challenging other teams, you're not really challenging them to like destroy the goal is to listen really well and to like help them build their case even further by asking challenging questions that will get into the nitty gritty of how they're going to solve a real world issue. And it requires teamwork, not only in terms of like speaking time, but also like the position, because you have to kind of come at a unified front and you don't know what the question is ahead of time. So it could be whatever you know the case. There's an ethical thorny case, but usually the question switches whose agency is involved or whether it's a micro scale or a global scale. You could be an individual or a government or a corporation. And based on how it's switching around, it could be about what's necessary versus optimal. And so there's a lot of impromptu in that moment. You have 2 minutes to talk to your team and to try to, as a team, come up with a consensus. In terms of whether we have all five people speaking, it really depends on the team I get. Every year it's very different. So like our first year, that was definitely everyone just spoke. Um, our second year, we had main speakers who had sometimes they had speech and debate backgrounds actually, and they just like were very eloquent at like putting it into the right sentence. So someone would be like, "Oh, I'm really concerned. impact environment, stuff like that. And they'll be like, we are very concerned about the environmental impact caused by the emissions in this. And sometimes you'd have people who are really good impromptuers, some people who are really good at doing the work ahead of time and really thinking about the case before they got in the round. They didn't really like to be off their, but they really needed time to mull. And then you had other people who were really good, maybe introverts that didn't like to speak, but were still valuable. And actually, reducing their speaking role would be good because they just want to pass notes and have their ideas, turned in to something beautiful sounding by someone who's really used to public speaking. And so, I mean, I think the hardest thing is you have to kind of work with your team dynamics to see who even wants to speak, who's terrified. And you also have to gauge, do you guys want to try to optimize competitive advantage, or are you guys looking for a more everyone, we're just going to here have fun? And every time I get a group of students, they all have different feelings about that. So we need to have a powwow in the beginning to figure out how it's going to go. My first students were just like, we just want to have fun. We just want to come in there and talk philosophy, and that's what we did. And my second year students are like, okay, we did that. We want to win.
Mm.
We will do whatever we have to do. We want it to be more, we want to make it more challenging if it leads to self-improvement.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, this is a great carrot and a stick. If I can get them to think about morally nuanced issues through the guise of the competition, that might be great. And even then, I think the competition is a trick, if you will, is a way to get people to understand ethical nuance and all the complications therein. So yeah.
Absolutely. So you're saying that every team that you've described and the most recent team won the National High School Ethics Bowl. This is true, right?
Yeah. Last year's team,
Yeah.
yes. Uh-huh.
Incredible. So that's I want to say over 400, 500 teams across the country, maybe competing for this top spot. They all go to UNC in Chapel Hill and they compete in person after multiple rounds getting to this point. Unbelievable achievement. But are you telling me that all of your successful teams have been different students? It's not the same kids going through the years?
Yeah, it's different students. We
Okay.
had we had the most students we had in a row. There was one student that went to three of the tournaments. She went from kind of a quieter role to moving more towards leadership. She graduated last year, and then last year we also added a student that also we only had two returning students from the team that won nationals last year, and those two kind of trained the other team, and then we won the regional again this year with those two. But they're completely different. The maximum they had been on it was 2 years of the four. So our team that won regionals. Okay, so funny story. So the first year we did it, we went to regionals and we won regionals with my philosophy students, and they were mainly seniors. And they didn't even want. They were very 1 foot out the door. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. We've been talking about ethics in class. I don't know why you would be. But they were like, I don't know if we're going to go. So then they went and they won the regionals and they were invited to a divisional round. And for those who don't know, it's like a Zoom conference with basically another state champion. So the national championships, instead of having 50 teams from all the states, has 25 or so, or 24. I think that it's the continental US. Um, and you have a one elimination round in the divisionals against another region champion. So you have to not only win your region, but then you have to beat basically a state champion, and in order to get the invite. So this group was like, yeah, we don't think we're gonna compete. At the time, I was like, what? I was like, so we have one member. We have one member of the Ethics Bowl, and we're going to play the state champions of Utah. And so I went to my AP Lit class and I said, will any of you learn Ethics Bowl? We have 2 weeks and then you'll be competing. And thank goodness we got 3 snow days. And those students used the entire snow days to Zoom and practice. And they ended up qualifying. And But they were a completely different batch. And so it feels like every year it feels like an adventure in terms of what the group is going to bring. And
Yeah.
even students who rejoin the team from one year to another become very different people. So
Mm,
they react differently to different team
mm,
dynamics. And they also are changing. I mean, they're adolescents, like growing and reading and changing their mind in terms of where they're leaning in terms of ethics and so it feels different like every year you teach it. Even if
mhm,
you had the same, I've never had the same team from one year to the next, but if I had, it would feel very different from one year to the next.
mm. So one thing that this seems to suggest is that your influence perhaps is pretty important because you've had multiple teams compete at a high level. What do you do to help train a team? And does the fact that you're teaching a philosophy class separately, so they probably have a pretty good knowledge of the ethical theories before they even come to the tournament, does that have a big influence?
Sadly no, because I have not been able to get my philosophy class is it was taught my senior year. And a lot of the seniors are like the least likely to do ethics bowl. They're like starting seniorize. They're starting like to think about colleges, and it's hard to embark on something new. So, ironically, a lot of the people who took my philosophy class were not interested in the competition element. And so, as evidenced by that first year, in the second year, I think we had zero people who took the capstone to go into ethics bowl. And so so I can't really say it's the class. One is I feel like the education that they're getting at Basis is helpful. So like they take a lot of APs and they practice a lot of critical thinking pretty early on. My literature classes have a lot of ethical dilemmas. I mean, if you read books, you'll just see this ethical dilemma after ethical dilemma. And also we've had a really good speech and debate run. So I want to say like there's a lot of people that go into it. NAU sends professors sometimes to help us out in training. And my attitude is I'll take any help I can get. And they've been great. Like we have Julie Peering sometimes come in and help our students. Yana Vance, members of the NAU Student Collective will come in and workshop ideas with us. And I treat it as like a communal ecosystem rather than just me. So I want to like offset that. In terms of training, we go over frameworks a lot, and the first thing I do is I try to address some kind of maybe some misconceptions that students have. So, one big conception that students have is I can just go with my gut. So, give me an ethical puzzle, I'll just think about it, and I'll solve it. And I think that it's, in some ways, it's a mark of a conscientious student that they are reliant on their gut and they feel trained in that way. But I mean, we read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I do talk about like how your conscience can actually be sometimes just society telling you what it should be. And there has been a long history of people going with their gut and making really atrocious ethical calls. And the danger, just like we understand in science that there's an illusion, you think you see something, but actually it was something else. And yet, for a lot of people, for ethics, it's much simpler. And it's not to say that the gut can't help, but maybe we can do a little more at the higher end of things. So maybe we can try to figure out where that gut instinct is coming from and use it as a starting point to dig a little deeper rather than as an end point. And it also helps you with ethical discussions because if I'm just like my gut saying this and your gut saying this, we can't really talk. I mean, we've just kind of like we've ended the conversation. So if you like try to analyze yourself and like why you are like where you're coming from, then it's good. So then I teach utilitarianism and deontology and common critiques, how to answer those critiques. A lot of times their understanding of those ethical systems are very limited. So for those who don't know, utilitarianism is a system where it goes, we can at least agree that happiness is real because you can subjectively understand that, and subjectivity is still real. So this is a mind blowing for some students who are a little more stimmy. They're like, no, if I have it a feeling in my head, it's not real. And I go, no, it's still real. Feelings are real. Even if they're not easily quantifiable, even if you can't pick them up with tweezers, and you can start there as one aspect, and then usually I say there's a critique about mob rule, and I go, but this is actually just the surface level of the discussion because if it's not just how many, but how much, it could be that one minority is negative a million utils, which actually beats all of the masses. Or it could be a precedence of injustice, creates widespread ruin. And we go into like all the back and forths, and then we switch to deontology. And I'm not a deontologist myself, but I try to make it alluring and I try to support the deontologists on my team if they want to go that route. And I talk about the common critiques that if things are based on a principle, where do the principles come from? How do you know it's not just your gut going like, on principle, I believe that we should always say hi to neighbors. Or like on principle, we should always drink a Diet Coke in the morning. Like, where do the principles come from? What's called in philosophy grounding. And oftentimes when you have a deontology team you're facing, these discussions are really important because the challenge to any kind of principle is where is the grounding? Like, where do you get it from? If it's from consequences, then why not just consequentialism? And also, what happens when your two principles collide, which often happens in like real life? You believe in one thing, but you believe in something else too. And then a lot of times students want to say, I'll just go with my gut. But again, that's what I'm trying to move them away from. Like if you do that, then you might in life end up just picking whatever's convenient or what like feeds your ego or what's safe instead of what's right. So you really have to like challenge yourself now before it's a real life incident for like where those are coming from and how do you settle a tie? And there are different answers. A lot of times with them, we end up at a question rather than an answer. And with each case we take out, anytime they feel like it's pretty clear, I tell them they're misunderstanding the case. I say like everything you say when you take a position should feel icky. And if it doesn't feel icky, you haven't understood, so you need to keep studying. There's something beneath it that is going to make you feel like it's a tough call. And they begin to operate this. They'll say, like, oh my gosh, Mr. Calhoun, we're on case 4. It just seems so clear to me. It doesn't seem icky. I must be misunderstanding something. And I'll be like, great. Right. That like humility is better to deal with these now than in the judges round. And then after that, we'll do like workshops in the beginning, and then we'll do practices. I'll practice sample cases they can try to find the holes in. Classic ones are super vague answers. Students who don't want to be like wrong will often take very vague answers as a reply. So if it's like, I don't know, should we, should you ditch your friend who you play tennis with all the time to up your game, or is that a betrayal of the friendship? The vague teams will say something like, well, friendship is important, but prospering is important too. And you need to really balance and figure out how your friend would feel and how important is it to your game. And then I'll say like, okay, attack that. Figure out what's the whole. And like the goal here is to like really get the other team to find that same ickiness that we felt so that they understand how complicated things are rather than how simple things are. And that, you can be vague in the abstract, but real life is filled with the specifics, not the vagaries. It's this, you're dealing with this right now, and how are you going to react? And those vague principles are going to have to collide into choosing and making hard decisions. So we'll go over that. We'll go over different kind of questions that are morally salient versus more gotcha questions, and practicing like which one feels a little more like debate, that it's not real, it's just kind of tricky, versus which one is at the heart of the real ethical problem. And we always aim for that second one. I think like in my experience, judges also like to see that. They don't like, okay, I'm going to invent a really hard question that's tangential to the question you were asked and see if you can answer it. It's more like, how do you dig deeper into this and get the
Mm.
judges to set things up after that? So those are basically how our practices work.
That sounds so good. Oh my gosh. And it sounds like you have enough time to like go into this. Often a big issue that we have is just a restriction of time. And it's like the best you can do is give like a really broad overview of util, deontology, virtue ethics, teach them the structure and go from there. But sounds like you have time to go really deep. That's so wonderful. Um
Yeah. I don't let them choose any framework though. So like with care ethics,
oh
virtue ethics, I'll say like, let's learn one that you guys like. And then I'll give you the brief overview. You pick, and then we go deeper.
yeah,
And then just use that. And then know the other ones for responses, for
yeah,
dialogue, but you don't have to know them as deep. So
yeah.
we like incorporated virtue ethics, rule-based utilitarianism, and
Mm.
Rawls justice for nationals last year. But we ran those three all the time, and we didn't have any secret categorical imperative in the background, but we knew what categorical imperative was,
Yes.
and so on. Yeah.
So so when your team presents, are they starting with in fact, can you talk me through like roughly how you think a team should give their presentation? Does it start with like a summary of the case, or do you assume that already and then yeah,
Okay, yeah. So what I would advise is, so first of all, not all members of the team are into providing the same thing and are all comfortable with the same speaking roles. So you kind of have to first, like when you get a team, you want to figure out who wants to pre-memorize their words and likes that structure of like safety. Like I'm going to say this every time, and I don't feel as comfortable winging it. And some students have real anxiety about winging it, and I myself try to honor that instead of pushing them. I might say like wing it for like a sentence or two, but I'm not going to ask them to deliver a monologue or anything like that until they're comfortable. So typically speaking, what I have is we have one student read the question verbatim back and then answer the question in 1 to 2 sentences. It can say like, yes, but there are many qualifications. You don't have to say all the qualifications. Or no, however, we would mitigate this with this. But it needs to be a firm answer because answering the question is so important and students so easily get derailed. That's not required. It's just organizationally, I think it's easier for the kids to know that. I think that the next stage is to outline how you're looking at it. I like an ethical lens myself, but this is more controversial. Some people don't run ethical lenses, and you don't need to run an ethical lens. In fact, there's been like very strong teachings to judges do not require them to say utilitarianism because it might be not everyone knows ethical theory, and you don't want to make Ethics Bowl a place where people can't just say their thoughts, which might be valid, even if there's not. Someone might have a great theory, but their application is messy. Where someone really applies all consideration to all the stakeholders, but doesn't have ethical theory in the back of their mind, the second one should probably win. The more person you'd want to make the ethical decision in real life. But I always say you should have a framework for my teams because I don't like going with your gut and that principle that I want them to practice, like think through it like a logical puzzle where there are rules. Then next, we have a speaker define the framework so that the other team is not left. So that's a pre-memorized speech for a pre-memorized. And then someone answers the question generally. Then someone tries to answer the question's application to the case. Then is a different framework that is not ours where they elaborate on how that person would see it, and then they offer a response. Finally, I have a section of time that is odds and ends, where any member of the team can just figure out what was not said through the organization and just add thoughts. But at this point, they've already said their claim on the case, they've explained their reasoning, and they have looming questions there. So this is just kind of a bonus where they like can add another looming question, adds another clarification or a qualification. And then finally, we have a closer and an opener, the same person who read the question, reads the question again, gives the team answer again for the sake of clarity, and it feels like a nice, like harmonized state. So that's how I organize it. Or
That's
some,
really good.
yeah.
Very similar to how I teach it. One really this now we're getting really into the weeds, but when you do that other theory, which I think of as a counter argument, but
Oh,
you seem to be phrasing it more as like, another perspective. Does that other perspective, do you try to make it so that it contradicts your team's position?
yeah, so I think in the actual rubric, it's called looming questions. What questions would loom large in the mind of someone who disagreed with you? And so it's not exactly clear whether it's someone who's on your side with framework, but thinks you've misapplied it, or whether it's someone who's approaching it from a completely different lens. And it's not clear whether it's an outright disagreement or a potential logical hole that you haven't expanded upon. So it's phrased very flexibly, but I think if you start with a framework, it's best if the looming question is in a framework style. So I think if you're going to go like we're rule-based utilitarians, then it raises the question, what's a deontologist thinking? Are you actually seeing how someone who's not you looks at it? And so based on what the argument is, it might change. It's really hard when it's like guidelines questions, like give me some guidelines for when we could pave a road. It's like, well, a
What's the
counter
guideline?
argument is there are no guidelines. And so that can be really tricky to navigate. But yeah, a counter argument is a good way to put it too.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, I teach it as there are two types of counter arguments, from one from within the framework and one from outside. So within the framework is like, well, we might have applied the utilitarian reasoning wrong. There might like some people might say that this countervailing benefit to this other group actually outweighs. However, we discharge that, or we slightly modify our position in order to deal with that criticism. Or okay, this is actually another really important question. Um, and a topic discussed in this book as well. The empirical reality is not front and center in an ethics bowl round in the same way that it is in a debate round. Even though in debate it gets messy because people are like making stuff up and well, it can be a little dodgy. But in ethics bowl, it's like you would rarely hear someone come in and say, well, this hyper specific law that was passed or realities of the situation. It's more founded on hypotheticals. And I just wonder what you think about that. Like, if a team gets up and says, assuming these things are true about the world, then we would derive this sort of conclusion. But we'll admit if the world is different in various ways, if we're wrong about these empirical facts, that would cause us to change our mind. Do you like that kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, there's actually a little bit of both. Like nationals round last year, we had a question about embedded journalism. That seemed very non-hypothetical. It seemed very real world. And then we had another one that was one year that was really, really hypothetical about like a future community that didn't have enough housing and was thinking about kicking out the retirees of their overly large houses. So it ranges. I think they both serve a specific purpose. So generally speaking, the hypothetical ones are really the way I look at it is they're what they're trying to do is get at the heart of a moral conundrum by trying to eliminate details that would get you out of the debate. So, like, they know that when it's real world, you can, like, fly out some piece of evidence that goes, there's no real problem here. We can just do this. And then you're out of it. And you don't have to wrestle with, one part of yourself being at war with another part of yourself because you found a way out. And so, what I like about hypotheticals is they force you don't have that exit ticket. They force you to really confront those two at the cost of maybe for some people they're a little less realistic, a little less practical. Although I think practicalness should be part of ethics. I mean, it doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense that you would do things in a perfect world or like you wouldn't account for what it's going to do to your mental health or stuff long run. Like you have to. In fact, I think that's so important because students can see ethics as too cumbersome unless you integrate that in. Real world issues really help too. So I like that there's a balance between them. Um, I think one worry about the real world is I've noticed that there's like two different types of teams that you'll see at nationals, and maybe this is your experience too. But there's two parts of the rubric that are actually at tension with each other right now in Ethics Bowl. And I think it's really fun how these like things come out and different teams are trained based on which item of the rubric they're trying to hit.
Mm,
And they both can be good, but the last like two nationals I would say were two teams that were focused on different parts of the rubric. And even judges have preferences for which part of the rubric they're going to hit. And so we had to like, so specifically, there's one part of the rubric that says that your argument needs to be clear and like very like well stated, if you will, like very like we can follow it.
mm,
And then the other part of the rubric is how well you survive judges' questions and commentary. And at first, those don't seem like their intention at all, right? Except that the easiest way to make a case clear is to make your position simple. That is easy and extreme. So you say, we believe, like the retiree houses, you'd be like, we believe in property rights. And they own the houses, and that's that. And the rest is, you say some people don't. We disagree with them. You got the looming questions there. And you have like property rights, property rights, property rights, property rights. Very simple. You can now focus on eloquence and pathos and all kinds of other things because you're not really building qualifiers or anything like that. And so, like, let's just say team one takes that approach. And then team two is like, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. Okay, they can do it in this circumstance, but not this circumstance. They can do it in this circumstance, but not this circumstance. This, but not this. This, but not this. This, but not this. And the judge is like, well, that was complicated.
mm,
and chances are you're going to stumble a little on your delivery. So your clarity score goes down. So you start the score with the team that was simple, property rights, up ahead because of that element of the route. But now come the questions from the opposing team, the question from the judges. They'll be like, well, what about eminent domain? Do you not believe in eminent domain? How are you going to build roads if there's just property rights no matter what? And then suddenly the team that was very simple has to struggle to keep it together. And usually they just have to dig down into this position. They don't score as well there. While the team that was all complicated will be like, well, that was actually our point four sub point C handled that situation. And so sometimes there's a joke in Ethics Bowl that there's like nuanced teams versus like clear teams. And the
mm,
nuanced teams are like messy,
mm,
but they really do well with questions because they live in that messiness and they get
mm,
attacked sometimes from both sides. From the side, like if you're taking a middle ground, you get attacked from the people who want you to go a little further this way and a little further this way. So it's a harder position to take. But I like personally as a coach, I always go with nuance. Like I would rather always be messy. I would rather us lose because we embrace the nuance and weren't as clear as we could in navigating how it all factored in when we were deciding that middle ground than to be extreme and simple but not ready for the real world of which actually I think exists in nuance. But that
mm,
is a dilemma as a coach because there are those two things. There's the question and answer, and then there's simple. And simple doesn't have to mean right. It just means very clear in your position. And we encountered all kinds of teams at nationals, and we tried to like work on our clarity because let's call it the nuance team. That was like the focal point is how do we give all the exceptions and qualifiers and find somewhere in the middle of all this and explore the really tough spots while at the same time being clear about we have conviction
mm.
uh, in the face of our humility. And that's again attention. You're supposed to have humility and then conviction, which is what you need
Yeah.
in life. But like it's so hard to teach. It's like, but it's so rewarding, I think, to watch students grapple with that.
Absolutely. It's such a good point. What do you do then when a team, I've just been to the Rhode Island Ethics Bowl and to the Lower Mainland British Columbia Ethics Bowl and like judged both of them. And then we run all of our online tournaments. And one thing I notice is when you do get a team who gets up and gives a simple stance, and often I find maybe this is a debatey type thing, they stand really firmly on that stance. And then when they are questioned by Team B or by the judges, they, as you say, sort of dig their heels in, and it ends up sounding not very nuanced. I just wonder when you're in that position, if, say, you have come up with a case that you realize was a little simplistic, not deliberately, but sort of accidentally, and you realize, oh no, like we missed all of these interesting ideas. Do you think that a team should step back their position and say, "Gosh, you're absolutely right. We might have missed some things here." Should they modify their position throughout the round, or should they arbitrarily stand on something that they realize isn't necessarily true? What do you think is better for
Oh,
them?
yeah, that's a good. So they're already a little in hot water at that point because they didn't, I think, before the round figure out all the nuance. But sometimes it's impossible. Like Nationals round, we got asked a question that it was not totally in line with the case. It was
Mhm.
partially aligned with the case. And so our students were thinking on their own. Like I couldn't coach them on anything. I'm just like, okay, this is a good test because you're gonna have to think ethically, completely without any adult soundproofing or pointing out anything you might be missing or anything like that. And they did it well. It's really I think that you need to not reverse your big position. If you want to, okay, the question is, do you want to win or do you want to learn? Learning, I think you just reverse your position. I think that's best. And as a coach, I think you should tell them to probably reverse their position. But there is a middle ground between reversing your position and holding firm, which is nuance your position. So usually the answer is something like it's right, but there are some exceptions or there are some qualifiers. And the biggest mistake I see is no qualifiers, no exceptions. There's no hedging to try to. Usually it's like, okay, one, something bad's going to happen. And you live in a world where something's bad's going to happen. But you're like, if I choose this one, but I hedge it a little bit, I can like tilt it so it's not quite as bad by mitigating the downsides of that position. And so oftentimes what I would say is there's no harm in adding a qualifier, an exception. I don't think that that undermines your position. I think that strengthens it. So if you say, oh, property rights, property rights, property rights, and then you get questions about eminent domain, then you go, oh, that's a really good. I mean, I think the best response would be something like this. That's a really good critique of property rights being absolute. In retrospect, they're not absolute. There are probably a lot of nuances where they could be overridden. In this case, we don't think the nuances are grounded in enough. And those nuances are really complicated. One qualifier we would have if it was saving someone's life, and the property rights was not needed for life giving.
Mm.
But we have to admit we're coming at this new, so we're trying to abridge it. That itself might be open for further modification the more we thought about this and discussed this. So I think
Yeah.
like there's this fear that if you modify it, that will open up a can of worms. But it's okay to be working it out with the judge and fine tuning it with the macro picture still the same.
Yeah.
It's okay to make changes to the micro picture while that
Yeah.
macro picture is unfolding. So that's what I would say they should probably do.
Mm. I also make sure to tell my teams that they should be explicit when they're doing that and say, like, thank you, that is a really tough question. That has caused us to reevaluate slightly instead of just being like, well, and answering it like the exception is obvious and like they'd always thought of it, which strikes me always as a bit disingenuous and debatey again, that they're like, yeah, well, of course, in that situation we wouldn't. And the judge can be like, but isn't that a massive shift from your initial view? And it all gets a little awkward. I think being explicit and open about and intellectually um, humble is critical in those situations when you're in the hot water.
Yes. Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Very good. Oh, this has just been so fantastic. Honestly, I feel like I've learned so much as a coach as well from this discussion. Can I ask one last question,
Yeah.
which is if you could change rules about the ethics bowl or the structure of the event or anything at all, what would you change?
That's tough. I was actually on the rules committee
Mm,
last year. Which we didn't get a lot of rules because we didn't want to. I think there was some reason why you didn't want to. Kyle, who was in charge of it, he's a really, really nice guy. He was like, we're not going to change the rules this year, but maybe next year.
mm,
So I oversaw a lot of suggestions. Most of the rules that they suggested, I found kind of complicated. Like some people thought that sportsmanship scores are create gamification of
mm,
kindness. which I agree with, but also it incentivizes kindness. So it's interesting, like all the rule changes are tricky within those systems. I do think um, we need more tournaments that would be helpful because one tournament is just hard to get kids excited because you just wait and wait and wait. And then they're like, we have a kid who's sick the day of the tournament. They've waited like 6 months for this tournament. That's why I'm very excited about TK Ethics providing some venues, although in-person venues are also important. Like there's something very valuable about sitting face to face with someone and talking with them about it and seeing all those like subconscious and after the round, like there's this moment after the round where the votes are in and the teams just collide in love. And it's just I don't know how to replicate it, but it's great. So yeah, I don't have anything off the top of my head that would be a very specific rule that should be
Mhm.
amended. Um, Most of them could be improved in some ways, but I think they would harm something else. So what are your thoughts? Do you have a rule change that you've always wanted with Ethics
Well,
Bowl?
I'm going between obviously our online tournaments have a different structure, and because they're online and they incorporate teams from East Asia and from the US, you're running into these like pretty hard time zone issues where some kids are having to stay up till 1 a.m. and some kids are getting up at 7 a.m. So if you wanted to increase anything, like I'd love to have more judges' questions, I'd love to have more prep time. I see no great reason to give only 3 minutes of prep time to the team coming up with their case. You just end up with better discussion if you had 5 or 6 minutes of prep time. So honestly, extending the time and then extending social time as well in our rounds where teams get to just talk to each other openly or have chats, which is hard enough online, but we have no time for that. So those are things that I wish we could solve, but I just don't know how. Another like other thoughts that I've had are about how to increase the collegiate atmosphere. So maybe having, like they do in the middle school ethics bowl at Harvard here, they swap the teams around. So they just have like, different teams mixing together and then they get an extra prep time and then they do it like that. So that it's totally non-competitive. I've thought maybe like imagine if you did that with senior teams just for one round and it wasn't part of the competition. It was just for the educational element. That would be really interesting and I think
Yeah.
fun as well for the teams. So
Yeah. If you're building, I mean, like that online community, I think that'd be fun if you had individuals just like being on random teams. That could be a really interesting, or like social time where it's like get to know you for 3 minutes prior, like say something about yourself. Yeah. And then
mhm.
online also you have to worry. I think coach oversight is also really important because it's so stupid. I mean, I love some of the things that AI has done, but it makes it so easy to cheat these days that like you can like really run the opposing questions on a keyboard and then have this like magnificent, well specified answer. So,
Mhm.
like a reliable faculty that can overlook and like just be like, I mean, like I think most kids in ethics both should just do it the right way anyway. But there's always like an issue with the online is that like it's really hard to mitigate that and try to erase that, especially when kids are on a computer when it's happening live.
Mm.
But yeah, the social experience. You can also cut down judge Q&A, if especially like sometimes with I think the TK ethics sometimes you'd have like one judge.
Mhm.
And so then you'd have
True.
like 10 minutes seemed like a lot for that for the one
Mm.
judge. They're like, they're asking different questions and they might have three good questions, but like if you keep the round time shorter, then you have faster time arounds. That also helps with the people coming from all over. You have faster tournaments. It's not as much of a time commitment if it's, 1 a.m.
Mm.
on one of their circles and you can cut it down to midnight. I mean, that like hour alone could be, and then they get to see more teams and more, more, make more potential friends or something like that.
I
Um,
like that. Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
one other thing is you could have blind ethics bowl case.
Of course.
I've
So good.
always thought about like because like there's so much with the use of AI and everything else, both in person and live. Sometimes you want to train kids to just think ethically instead of now there is a certain kid that I don't mind, the kid that wants to overly research things. that's a useful life skill. So I don't necessarily want to take that away from all of their events. But the one nice thing about questions that are very different from the case, or cases that would be a surprise, is it promotes just figuring out things in the moment, not relying on any kind of AI or outside help, and just
Mm,
seeing what the students do when they really truly are on their own. I think there was like
mm,
even one event where a student was asked a question that was not on the sheet, and they're like, "Wait, can you do that?" And they were very flustered because they had already rewritten, like, and it's very different because in real life you don't always have like 3 days to make the decision. Sometimes things are happening live, and we do need impromptu ethics. Like that is a
mhm,
skill too, just like deliberate ethics are a skill. And maybe have the impromptu rounds be more impromptu events. So instead of like national policy, which should take like a lot of deliberation, have it be like a heated moment that is unfolding before you
mm.
and you don't have time to pull out your phone and ask ChatGPT or like ask a whole like, but you have to make a decision quickly, and that
Yeah.
would mirror that like real life experience. So
Mm.
it's not that Ethics Bowl is is not good as it is. It's just that there's more to explore, and there's a lot of skills to develop in kids that are important.
100%. I lied when I said last question. Truly last question, and then I'll let you go. AI, you've mentioned it a few times now as an issue. Do you see there being value in using AI at all to prep for rounds or to enhance discourse? Imagine you didn't have a coach.
I think of AI as like the internet. I would never tell a kid not to use the internet. But I would tell a kid to be careful because the danger is that they would use the internet instead of thinking, instead of as a way of sorting through their thinking. AI has a useful role in Ethics Bowl. You have to train students on prompting. You have to train students on what AI is and isn't. Um, I think it's really helpful to like, what's the counter argument to this? I would
Mm,
want students doing that in real life. Like if I was going to make a big decision that would have a lot of impact on people, and I was asking whether I should run it on AI to hear the counter arguments or not, I would think I would probably be a better person if I read the counter arguments.
mm,
Because in real life, you don't always have the counter arguments readily available. Say the person you're talking to is really heated and they're not ready to talk to you about it right now, but you want to hear their perspective, but you can't probe them about it without worsening things potentially. Or you want to trial something and AI might go, "Whoa, that's way too hostile."
mm,
You go like, "Oh my gosh, coming from AI feels very different than coming from the friend. I might need to calm this down."
mm.
So I think good use of AI is something that is is helpful for ethics. I think it can identify stakeholders you weren't considering. It can identify very quickly research you weren't aware of. And I think it just we have limited time in the real world. So practically speaking, beyond the water problem of using AI, which is another thing. We'd probably have to debate the ethics of using AI before you used AI. But if it leads to firmer ethical decision making, I think training your students on that is useful and helpful, and I would dare say maybe optimal as a coach.
Really, really good. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Luke. This has absolutely been um, riveting, and I really hope people get a kick out of it. I'll publish it soon. Are you okay as well if I take snippets and put them on social media and those kind of things? I've got a flourishing TikTok these days that I put this sort of content on. So if you're okay with that.
Yes, absolutely. As long as you're aware, as I said before, it takes a village. So, so our whole system, I mean, the students have done like a ton of work, and I don't want to think that this was everything that went into this. It's complicated, and I've enjoyed talking to you too. I would love to hear maybe when we have more time, like how you coach your ethics bowl team, and hear about your experiences because I'm sure they're really rich, and there's that background there. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully we'll meet in person one day. In fact, I think I mentioned to you we're talking with Arizona College Prep about running an in-person event, and that's like right around the corner from you, right?
yeah, yeah. I think you mentioned something in Prescott, but Phoenix works too. That's a 2.5 hour drive. That's doable.
Oh,
It's a straight drive. It's not East Coast driving. Um,
okay.
you just drive on a road and you
Um,
go straight for a long time.
yeah.
So yeah, it's totally possible. I don't know. Our ethics bowl team next year is going to be a completely different group of students.
Never know.
No idea who I'm
Yeah.
going to get and whether they're going to be like down for that or not. But I will be all motivation and hope to get them together for it.
Fantastic. Well, I hope we can hang out in person at some point soon.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much, Luke. We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Ciao for now. Bye.